Hi everyone, Vince here with part 4 in the BUSTTMAM series on the magnificent factory builder called Shapez. No idea what the BUSTTMAM is? Well, then I guess you had best start with part 1 because we're not gonna get into that today. Then what are we going to get into today, you ask? Well, the answer is we're going to talk about the input lines of the producer factory, which is, this one, this part where the machine just starts inputting or it starts outputting its shapes, that part. Last video, we spoke about the physical part of that, but today we are going to have a look at the wiring. And without wanting to toot my own horn too much, I do feel like I pulled a pretty brilliant move. And I hope you've brought a clear mind, because depending on your experience with this game in combination with your analytical thinking skills, this video could potentially get intense and quite confusing. So now, in order to keep it as structured and transparent as possible, I'm going to split this video into 3 sections, 3 chapters, if you will. In the first chapter, I would like to focus on flat versus floating pieces. This machine can handle them both, so the question is, how can we tell the machine which kind of piece it needs to produce? In the second chapter, I'd like to talk about how I wired up all of these machines, taking into account that I only have 4 cells of height to maneuver in. And in the third chapter, we're going to focus on how I generate the signal required for telling the rotation devices at the end. Let's have a look at them again. These rotation devices right here. Telling them how often to rotate the shape, right? Because last time I explained that I am rotating my main signal in function of where the scaffolding piece might go, and then afterwards we might need to rotate that back. So those are the 3 parts I want to talk about. And without further ado, let's dive right in.
Chapter 1.
So a quick recap of what flat pieces and floating pieces are. On the left, we see a flat piece that can have 1 up to 4 quadrants, and all of them are located strictly on the same layer. That is a flat piece. So a flat piece can never consist of more than 1 layer. On the right, we have a floating piece, and a floating piece can also consist of 1 up to 4 quadrants, but each layer is going to have only 1 quadrant, and all of the quadrants must strictly be located on 1/2 of the shape. Okay? And now I need, let's look at what these two have in common. What they have in common is that they can both consist of 1 up to 4 quadrants, right? In one case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 on the same layer, and in the second case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 on each layer. Okay, so I needed one machine that would extract all of the quadrants in both scenarios, right? So whether we're dealing with a flat piece or a floating piece, I need to be able to homogeneously extract all of these quadrants. How do I go about that? Well, if we are dealing with a flat piece, then the way to extract your sources, extract your quadrants, is with cutters, right? So in order to extract the quadrants of a flat piece, you need cutters. Now, how to extract the quadrants of a floating piece? Well, that's easy. You don't need cutters, but you need unstackers. We are going to obtain our 4 elements with cutters, and in the other one, we are going to obtain them with unstackers. Now, the secret to this is that both cases will never apply at the same time. So either you have a flat piece or you are dealing with a floating piece, right? Both of these setups are never going to have output. It's always going to be either one or the other. So the first thing I want to do is I want to connect the outputs with one another. There we go. So there we have a basic setup, and now I can make this shorter. Right, so if we are dealing with a floating piece, well then the output is going to come from there, from the unstackers, and if we are dealing with a flat piece, like so, then the signals are going to come from the cutters. Now, this is good and all, but if we put these together, we're going to get signal conflicts, right? So in the beginning, I need a module that discerns what we are dealing with, right? Because even if I do it like so, we're still gonna get conflicts, right? And if I turn this into a floating piece, then we are gonna get conflicts. So I need a module that determines what we are currently dealing with. And the question is, how are we going to do that? Well, now let's look at what separates these two types of signals or these two types of pieces from one another. And the answer is actually pretty evident. A floating piece will always have more than one layer, and a flat piece will never have more than one layer. So a thing I could do is just connect an unstacker to this, like so, and then we can determine whether we have an output on the left-hand side. Because if we have a flat piece, then we don't. And we can use this output to determine whether we are dealing with a flat piece or a floating piece. If we're dealing with a floating piece, we are going to send the signal into the unstackers. And if we don't have an output here, then we are dealing with a flat piece, and we have to send our signal through to the cutter. Right? So now let's set that up. And there you've got it. That should be it, right? Oh no, not yet. There we go. Like so. This works. So now if we have a flat piece, the unstacker detects that we don't have an output right here, and therefore this signal going into the unstackers will be cut, and this signal going into the cutters will be allowed to continue. If, on the other hand, we are dealing with a floating piece, then the reverse is going to happen. We have an output here. This triggers the NOT gate right here, so it cuts this signal that goes into the cutters, and it allows this signal that goes into the unstackers to pass. And that is how I discern between flat pieces and floating pieces, and each time I'm going to get up to 4 outputs, each with 1 quadrant. Okay?
Chapter 2.
So now we know how to consistently extract our 4 quadrants from the main signal. The next challenge is hooking that output up to a bunch of filters that can get the machine going. And the main challenge here is that since my stacker arrays are only 4 cells high, I had to work within that same height on my wiring layer as well, right? Now, let's have a look at these filters for a bit, up to this point. So actually, I can delete this, right? So up to this point, this filter right here, this first filter, it requires a signal of the full shape. So either a windmill, a star, a square, or a circle. That's the signal it needs to receive. The same holds true for this filter. Now, this filter needs to receive the color information, so it needs a signal that tells me what the color is. So it needs to contain a paint signal, a color signal, in order to operate this filter. And then finally, this filter is a bypass filter for gray. And more specifically, if the shape is uncolored, then this filter should be receiving a 0 signal, right? So that the shapes move down this route and bypass the painter. If the shape quadrant is not gray, if it is colored, then this filter needs to receive a 1 signal, so that the shapes can pass through and into the painter. Excuse me. Now, the problem with this is that we need 3 different signals, right? One with a full shape, uncolored, one with only the color, and one with gray, yes or no. And then behind that, this needs to be a repetition of the actual signal, right? Of the actual quadrant. So what we get is we are going to need to hook up 4 wires to these filters, and we only have a height of 4 cells to do that in, and that is utterly impossible, right? So I put these crossings here to mark the boundaries, because this, whatever we do here, needs to be able to repeat. It would repeat here, right? So we don't have any space. If I hook up as much as this, well, then now the other 3 lines have no possibility to, to finagle this through. And the question is, how can I solve this? How can I get 4 different wires, maneuver them around in a space that's only 4 cells high? At first glance, it seems impossible, right? So, fasten your seatbelt. The solution I dug up takes the concept of signal encoding and pushes it to the next level. In a nutshell, signal encoding is an outside-the-box approach where you manipulate or simply straight up invent a specific shape or color signal that you don't even need for the actual output shape as such, but that you can make to work to your advantage. Now, I talked about the concept of signal encoding at length in part 3 of my BUSTTMAM series, so you can have a look at that if you want to know more. I will leave a link in the description if I think of it. So here's what I did, right? Imagine here we get an output signal of our quadrant, right? Let's just say it's a red. It's a red circle quadrant. Here's what I did. Now hold on to your hats. I take this signal and I copy it on top of itself with 1 rotation. So I stack it on top of itself with 1 rotation. Come on. There we go. And I repeat that once, twice, thrice. And now what we get is the following. We always get a signal, a 2-layer high signal, where the bottom layer is the full shape, colored, and the second layer contains the quadrant in its actual rotation, right? This will always be the case. And now I have created an extremely potent signal that I can hook up to all of these filters almost. Have a look. So we're going to pull it through, right? And the first thing I need from this is, remember, the signal of an uncolored circle, windmill, square, or star, right? And that is what we're going to get from this with 1 analyzer. There we go. Because as you know, an analyzer, what it does is it will always take the top right input of the bottom layer. It will always do that. And with this setup, you are guaranteed that you have the correct signal there, regardless of the orientation of your actual piece, right? So if, for example, the quadrant is not in the top right, but it is in the bottom right, something like that, right? Then with this approach, we are still going to get that signal from just the one analyzer, right? So that solves that. Now I take a copy of that signal and I feed it here as well, because here we need the same thing, right? That is 2 filters solved. Now I can take this signal and I can repeat the same thing there, but with the other side, right? Here is my color signal coming from the same encoded signal. And now for this one, we need to establish whether it's gray or not. We can do that very simply with another analyzer. Like, for example, does this work? Yeah, this works, I guess. So let's see how we can set this up. There we go. Is it gray? The answer is no, it's not gray. And if it is not gray, then this filter needs to receive a 1. And therefore now it is receiving a 1, so that the yellow shapes, or so that the shapes will move into the painter instead of bypassing it. So that is, 3 of our 4 signals done. And now the last thing I can do is the second layer of this shape is always going to contain the actual quadrant that we need in the correct color, in the correct orientation. So the only thing I need here is an unstacker, and there we go. Bob is your uncle. So now, if I move that there, we will always get the correct signal. I was a bit too optimistic with the space, too pessimistic with the space I need, right? So let's delete that. There we go. And now, let's make it work. See, there we go. That is how that works. And I even have space left to spare. And as we will see later, we are going to need that space as well, because we haven't gotten to the third step yet. Now, you need to remember, you need to take into account that this needs to repeat every 4 cells, right? So I cannot go beyond the space we have right here. So if we move this up, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is where our next machine is going to be, So I am really confined for space, and we will still need to be able to get another signal across. But anyway, this is how that is handled. So let's have a look at one final example. Let's say a cyan star in the bottom left or something. And there it goes. Cyan star in the bottom left, and we get a full belt right here.
Chapter 3.
So the third thing I want to talk to you about is this rotation module right here, right? So again, if we are dealing with a floating piece, then this initial quadrant will have to be rotated to match the orientation of the scaffolding piece. And the scaffolding piece will always be in the top right? There is no wiring, like this is a constant. So what I decided to do, as I explained in the last video, is I manipulate my signal first so that it matches the scaffolding piece. Instead of manipulating the scaffolding piece, I manipulate the actual quadrant. And that gets stacked, and then afterwards, if applicable, it gets rotated to its proper orientation. And that is the third step and the third important step. And I would like you to pay attention to this, because this is also a pretty sweet thing I've pulled off, if I may say so myself. So, imagine that we have a red quadrant in the bottom left corner, right? And the bottom right corner. What I decided to do was, I am always going to take the top shape off, the top quadrant off, in case that we're dealing with a floating shape, because this only applies to floating shapes. So I'm going to take the top layer off, and that quadrant, I am going to make the scaffolding piece 180 degrees of that quadrant. So in this case, my scaffolding piece would have to be top left, right? Now, remember, my scaffolding pieces are lined up always in the top right. So that means I need to manipulate this shape signal so that it rotates clockwise once, so that it becomes the bottom left. And then I have to, after that has been stacked, I have to rotate that signal once counterclockwise or 3 times clockwise again to get to the desired outcome. Are you still with me? Good. So here's what I did. I made an encoding signal that is going to contain either 1 quadrant, 2 quadrants, 3 quadrants, and or 4 quadrants. And it really took me a long time to come up with this, right? But what these shape signals mean is, listen closely, what the shape signals mean is the amount of rotations that we don't need to have. Okay, let me repeat it. The amount of quadrants in this encoded signal stands for the amount of rotations out of 4 that we don't need to have. Hold on to that information. So, first, let's get a quadrant in the bottom left, right? Now we have our cyan star in the bottom left. The scaffolding piece would be in the top right. And since that is where our scaffolding piece is lined up, it means that we don't need to rotate this, right? We don't need to rotate this shape signal. And in that case, what I did is I'm going to, with the help of these analyzers and the rotations, I'm going to output a full circle that has 4 quadrants. If I have a shape in the bottom right, then we are going to get this shape with 3 quadrants on it. If I have a shape that's in the top left, in the top right, we are going to get this one with 2 quadrants on it. And finally, if I have something in the top right, let's see, whatever, a wide windmill, right? If we have a white windmill, then we are going to get this signal encoding. Now, what is this going to do? We're going to follow the signal along, and we are going to take the output of our initial shape, our initial quadrant, right? This rotates 4 times, so we are back in the original position, and we are going to use that as our input and output signal. And we are going to use this signal as the control. And for each step, we are going to determine, or I'm going to determine, whether this shape needs to be rotated, yes or no, right? So in this case, the first analyzer is going to give me a signal because we have a quadrant in the top right, okay? And in that case, the signal may pass without being rotated. You see this? Here is the rotation, but the signal is cut because of the NOT gate. And the signal is not going to be rotated. In the following steps, we don't get a signal here because the control shape does not have a quadrant in the top right corner, and therefore the white windmill shape is going to be rotated once, twice, 3 times clockwise. Are you still with me? So, we have this in the top right corner, and the scaffolding piece would have to be, eventually, will have to be in the bottom right. But it's not in the bottom right, it's in the top right. And this means that in order to stack it correctly, we need the white windmill to be in the bottom left. Okay? And that is what we do. We rotate it clockwise. Not here, but once, twice, 3 times, and we have it in the bottom left. So if now I connect that here, this is what we are getting. Okay, this is the signal we are getting. And now the last thing I need to do is, well, I'm going to need to rotate this, right? And we are going to use the same signal we had before. We are going to use that here as well. Look at the magic. So I have a signal that has one shape quadrant on it, one circle quadrant, and I'm going to reuse that signal here, again with the help of analyzers. So, one analyzer, 2 analyzers, 3 analyzers, 4 analyzers, and between each step, we are going to rotate that signal. So here's what we get, right? Oh, I used unstackers instead of analyzers. I am an idiot. There we go again. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And now, what do we see? 1 out of 4 analyzers gives me a signal, and the other one doesn't. If we have a signal, we need to rotate, and a rotation requires a 0 input on the filter, right? So we use NOT gates, 1, 2, 3, 4, and now Bob's your uncle. It gets rotated once, and the signal that we get for an output is our initial signal, which was the white windmill in the bottom right corner. Well, that's not good, because I did it wrong. These need to be clockwise rotations. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and now it should be good, right? Yes, exactly. Now we get what we need to get. Our white windmill quadrant in the top left corner with its scaffolding piece in the bottom right corner. There we go. And this now applies to any quadrant we input here. So if we take this, for example, then we will need a rotation. We need 2 rotations. So let's have a look at that. There we go. And if we have something in the, let's say, the bottom right, then we are going to need 3 rotations, right? And that's the bottom right. And that's how that works. Now, let's look at that in practice. Everything combined, the 3 chapters combined, now give us the following. We have our main input signals coming from the decoder, which we are going to talk about in upcoming videos, right? This is a floating piece, and it will be analyzed by this unstacker right here. It tells the machine that we do not need to acquire our quadrants by cutting, but by unstacking. So this signal is allowed to pass, and this signal is shut off. We get our 4 quadrants, well in this case it's only 2, we get our 2 quadrants from the unstacker. I'm going to take the first one of that and I'm going to use it to operate this to create this coded signal. And in the meantime, my main quadrant is going to be stacked on top of itself 4 times so that we receive this signal. This signal, we have now determined that we are going to need to rotate this signal 2 times. And not only that, but that applies to 4 stacking units because our stacking, because any piece can consist of up to 4 quadrants, right? So this signal needs to apply to 4 layers of stacking. So it's going to repeat that process for all of them, just like we've seen before. Here we get 1 rotation. Here we get another rotation. Here we get, no wait, I'm getting myself confused. We need 2 rotations, so this is no rotation, a rotation, and another rotation. And now, out of this signal, we are going to extract what we need, right? This is the signal that tells us which full shape we need to pass, we need to have advanced through this filter. Here is the signal that tells us whether it's uncolored or not. It is colored because it is white, and therefore we get a 1 on this filter, which will output the shapes to the painter. This signal outputs white, it outputs the color. And then, you know, if we get an uncolored shape, then this will output gray, but it won't matter because there won't be any shapes coming in. So the painter won't output, right? So it doesn't matter. And then the final shape, our unstacker, it will extract the actual piece we need, but remember, in its rotated form to match the scaffolding bit. Right, so in its rotated form, this is the actual shape we need, and I put a 0 converter. If we don't have a signal here, the signal will be converted into a 0, so that this trash can work and dispose of the actual shapes. That's how that works. And now I pull this signal, I finagle it through here, right? I let it continue to the end of the first stacking array, and here we have the setup with the analyzers and the NOT gates, which is telling the machine how to rotate the shapes back to the rotation it actually needs to be in, right? And then the final thing we haven't talked about before is the simple fact of closing these filters and these bottom filters right here, right? The way I did that is if we are dealing with a floating piece, well then we are going to have a signal on this wire. And that means that we need to get a 1 on all of these filters, right? So what I did is I converted this into a 1. It was a bit of finagling to get these, to get these shapes, to get these lines all connected and not, conflict with each other. But I pulled it off, so here we have a 1. This signal runs across, and then all the way at the end, I believe we have a NOT gate. Yeah, I am sorry about the intermezzo. I thought I had made a capital mistake in the setup of my machine, but I haven't. So if we are not dealing with a floating piece, let me start again. I was talking about this filter, right? And this filter has to be shut off if we are dealing with a floating piece. Okay, and now the thing is, I connected this encoded signal to that filter. And the reason I did that is actually also pretty interesting. The signal we get here will never ever match what will be coming along this belt if we are dealing with a floating piece, right? If we are dealing with a floating piece and these filters are open, then the shape that moves across this belt will never ever be the one that is on this signal. Okay? And therefore, the shapes will be halted in their tracks by this filter per definition. That's how that works. Okay? So, all of this, it looks pretty simple at first glance. You know, you see these shapes move and then you go like, okay, yeah, but there's a rotator there. But now that we have had a glimpse behind the scenes, I hope you can appreciate the thought that went into this about how, you know, how little wiggling room I actually had setting up these wires and how carefully every little bit, every unit on the wiring layer has been crafted and elaborated, established with a lot of care in order to make this work. And after a lot of speaking on my part, my mouth is dry and my throat is sore. After a lot of talking on my part, we have reached the end of this video. So I hope you found it very interesting, because I feel like there was a lot to uncover in what seems like just a regular, shape and color input. But there is really, you can really push the boundaries of this game if you set your mind to it. And I hope that this video has, helped you understand that, or that after seeing this video, you agree with that. And even if you don't, as always, I hope you had fun watching. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you again in the next part that we're going to do about this series. As of now, I don't really know what I will be talking about. I guess we will see. But either way, I hope to see you then and there. And for now, I wish you a lovely day. Thank you again for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.